Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We will begin, as we generally do, with a guided meditation. I want to invite you to find a comfortable posture, a comfortable seat, if you haven't already done so. With meditation or mindfulness, the overarching guiding principle is that whatever we do, we should be at ease. We want to facilitate focus and concentration and presence, but we don't want to ever be in a situation where we're doing that at the expense of our health. We don't want to cause pain for ourselves physically or emotionally. So just finding that space, that way of being, that posture that allows us to be comfortable and at ease, and at the same time to be alert and focused. So whether we're sitting in a chair or sitting on the ground or on a pillow, just taking a moment, finding that seat for ourselves. And an invitation here to close the eyes or to soften the gaze, whatever feels comfortable for us. We can keep our cameras on or off as we feel comfortable. We'll begin with 3 deep breaths together to ground us in presence and perhaps to allow us to enter into a space of setting an intention. We'll breathe through the nose if it's accessible to us, or softly between the lips. Breathing in deeply for, if we're able to, a count of about 4 beats. Holding the breath for a count of about 4 beats. And then exhaling for a longer duration, perhaps 5 or 6 beats. You're welcome to follow along or to find your own pace. Breathing in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Again, breathing in, hold, and out. One more time, in, hold, and out. Allowing the breath to find its own pace, its own rhythm now. Sometimes this feels a little bit like when we've been moving a lot and then we come to a place of rest and it just takes a few seconds, a few moments to find that stability. And once we've found it, simply noticing it, observing that rhythm, that flow of breath in and out. Noticing the breath means turning our awareness, our attention to the breath. We don't need to do anything else. We don't need to change the breath or control it. We don't need to analyze it. Just notice it. If it's helpful, we can think about this like focusing the lens of a camera when we're taking a portrait of someone or something. And we just focus that lens, find that place where the image before us is sharp and clear, and everything else in the background, it remains, but allowing it to just recede into the background. And it's okay if it's blurry and fuzzed out. It's still there. It'll be there waiting for us. We can return to it soon enough. But for now, as we snap this photo of this present moment with the camera of our awareness, we want to just focus that lens on the breath. The breath is constant. It's fluid and dynamic. And yet it's also a source of stability. It's an anchor. It's something we can always return to. We can continue to focus our awareness, our attention on the breath as our wonderful anchoring point, our home base. Or if we'd like to, or if it's part of our practice, we can see if gently and in a way that feels natural to us, along with the breath, we can notice a mantra, a word or a phrase, a sound that we can hold as our point of drishti, of focus. If we have such a mantra as part of our practice or our tradition, an invitation here to bring it more explicitly into this meditation. This can be the simple and yet profound chanting of Om. And we can do this softly, audibly, or simply within the mind. For some of us, this may be a mantra that corresponds to a name of a deity or a phrase of prayer or of praise. Or perhaps for some of us, our mantra, our sound of focus can be an affirmation, a quality we'd like to fix our meditation and set our intention on. Or perhaps a phrase or aspiration, whatever it is for us. If we'd like to, an invitation here to rest the awareness, the attention on the mantra or affirmation. Allowing again that camera lens of the mind and of the heart to zoom in, to sharpen, and to focus on the sound, or perhaps continuing to focus on the breath. becoming aware, noticing if our thoughts are jumping somewhere else, if our minds are wandering, simply noticing that without judgment or guilt. Just noticing it, and then in a spirit of kindness and yet firmness, simply bringing the mind back to the mantra or back to the breath. Noticing perhaps the ways in which our minds want to be elsewhere. Noticing without judgment whatever the mind is telling us in this moment, wherever it wants to pull us. And with kindness and yet firmness, guiding the mind back to the anchor, back to the mantra, back to the breath. Continuing to guide the mind back as many or few times as we need to in these final few minutes of our meditation together. Closing our meditation now with one final deep breath in, holding the breath and then releasing, perhaps chanting or simply hearing the syllable Om. That sonic representation and embodiment of infinite possibility. Breathing in deeply. Om. Gently, in a way that feels comfortable to us. An invitation here to softly open the eyes, perhaps to readjust our posture a little bit, to bring our awareness back to the room that we're sitting in and to this virtual gathering. As always, thank you so much for joining us. This is such a precious time and a precious gift that we give to ourselves and we give to one another to gather together, to allow ourselves to take a break, to hit the pause button, so to speak, and to, with intention and with purpose, to be present to this moment. It's a very auspicious day as well. Many in Indic traditions, in the dharmic traditions, consider this a new year. So for those observing, I want to wish you a very happy new year, full of new beginnings and possibilities. So I want to share our reflection for today, and perhaps we'll start the conversation today and continue it next week. So we're going to continue on with this theme of taming the mind. Our reflection today reads, taming the mind means bringing it back with kindness, firmness, and discernment. We touched on in our last session together 2 weeks ago this idea of the mind being so difficult to quiet and to tame. The mind is compared to the wind, which can just, a gust of wind can take us away or can knock us off course. But in the Gita, Krishna reminds us that with abhyasa, with practice, with holding strong, with learning how to hold strong and stay steady in our practice, fixed, and with vairagya, with learning the art of letting go, with abhyasa and with vairagya, the mind can be quieted. And so the question arises, what does this abhyasa and vairagya look like? What does this practice and non-attachment look like? How can we practically do it when we sit down to engage in meditation practice? And so Krishna, in the 6th chapter of the Gita, gives us a very wonderful, very practical suggestion or recommendation. Yato yato nischalati manaschanchalam astiram tatastato niyam yaitad atmanyeva vasham nayet. Krishna says, wherever the mind may wander due to its flickering and unsteady nature, we must repeatedly, again and again, withdraw it and bring it back to focus on the self. Sometimes when we think about taming the mind, sometimes texts will even use stronger language and talk about controlling the mind, curbing the mind. We can sometimes approach it in a very aggressive way. We can sometimes think about taming the mind in terms of, oh, I have to conquer over the mind. And there's certainly a place for that. And there are references that do talk about taming the mind as an act of conquering over the mind. And we'll talk a little bit about that next week, perhaps. This metaphor of the mind as a kind of a force to be reckoned with and even to be conquered over. But in today's reflection, I think we get an insight into another way of understanding taming the mind, and that is understanding our relationship with the mind as we might understand a parent's relationship with a child. I'm reminded of this experience that many of us have had of taking a small child grocery shopping with us. I don't know if those on the call can relate to this, or you may even remember being a small child and going with your parent to the market or to a grocery store yourself. So it's quite an experience, and it can be quite a trying experience. The parent is there in the store, with a list perhaps of necessary items to buy, with very limited time and energy, with a kind of a purpose and an intention in mind. And what happens? That child so easily becomes distracted and becomes attracted by all of the very attractive, shiny objects that are found there, right? Grocery stores know this, so they often set up displays just for this purpose, to get the attention of the little ones, knowing that if the child is attracted, the child will go, "Oh, I want this, I want this, I want this," and will very often, sometimes literally, sometimes figuratively, drag the parent there. And so now the parent has their shopping list. We have our shopping list as the parent, and the child has taken us off course. The child has taken us off plan. The child has taken us, we intended to maybe pick up some fruits and vegetables, and suddenly we find ourselves in the candy aisle, or we find ourselves in front of a big display of the most sugary cereal we can imagine. And the child is saying, "I want this, I want this." And the parent says, "No, no, you can't have it." And the child, what does the child do? Sometimes the child will just throw a tantrum. And I like this metaphor because I think it really speaks to our own experience. Sometimes, even with the best of intentions, we sit down to meditate, or we go into some practice, or even in our everyday lives, we have this intention to be present, to be focused, to do what we know is best for us, is best for our physiological, our emotional, our mental well-being. And yet so often the mind, in just an instance, takes us off course, and suddenly I want this, or I don't want that, or I'm bored, or let's go from here. So we sit down to meditate, and suddenly the mind starts crying out, "I'm bored, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty. Let's think about this. Let's go here. This is boring. Let's not sit and just focus on the breath. The breath is boring. Let's think about all the things that we have to do. Let's think about all the things that we did. Let's think about that vacation to the Bahamas that we went on. Let's think about, I wonder what's going on with the COVID numbers. I wonder what's going on with that political situation. We haven't checked our phone in a whole 15 minutes, right? And before we know it, the mind has just pulled us. And the most frustrating thing is that so often, either we just helplessly get pulled along, and so it's like the roles are reversed, and suddenly the child becomes the parent, and the parent becomes a child. So our mind, which we're likening here to a child, suddenly starts calling the shots, and we just helplessly go along. Or sometimes we resist the mind, but in that sense, we also get pulled off course, because now we're putting so much energy into fighting the mind and resisting the mind and yelling at it, that our focus goes entirely into that direction. Just like sometimes that trip to the grocery store, either we give in and then we kind of feel like, why did I do that? I had no intention to, and suddenly I'm being bossed around by my 4-year-old, or we resist and we fight back, and the child starts screaming and we scream back at the child. And suddenly, not only is that child having a meltdown, but we, the parents, we're also having a meltdown. So we want to avoid both of those extremes. And we want to find that middle ground of parenting the child. That means expressing kindness and compassion and love. And it also means, in that spirit of kindness, expressing firmness and taking responsibility. So we'll continue with this exploration of what it means to tame the mind the way a parent very kindly and yet very firmly guides a child. And we'll unpack this verse and this metaphor of the agitated, hyperactive child in the grocery store next week in our next session. Until then, thank you so much for joining us. We wish you the best for the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and for those celebrating, for the rest of the new year ahead. Thank you all so much. Namaste.